I'm Rayya. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Nelson, BC, the traditional territories of the Sinike, the Silks, and the Tanaha Nation. And I was a poet for a long time, and now I've been really drawn into the possibilities of creative nonfiction and memoir writing.
Awesome. Could you talk about the difficult story that you were able to write in my visual essay class, beginning with where you were at before you took the class and how the story was sparked and emerged?
Sure. So I had spent quite a long time writing poetry to process my grief and loss around losing my mom, and that was my tool. That was my writing tool, and I hadn't explored creative nonfiction or memoir at all. Um, and I discovered through your visual writing class that every container has a way to unlock different stories and to come at them sideways, and to really unveil uh, things that maybe I didn't think I could write about or knew I wanted to write about. So each form was really an invitation to do that.
And can you talk about the story that about your friend, your grief and loss story about your friend, and how the visual essay class helped unlock that story for you?
Sure. So I had never heard of a diptych or a triptych or many of the forms that I came across, and I tried to come at the writing without a preconceived notion of what I was going to write about. But what I ended up writing in the triptych that I wrote was a story that I thought I would never be able to articulate or write, and it was a deep lost story from when I was a teenager. And it involved quite a few people who are still in this world. Um, and it always felt a little bit off the charts, off something that I'd write or do anything with if I could write about it. But the triptych allowed me to kind of enter these difficult stories in three different ways, and somehow having them together in one form allowed them all to unfold. So it was a very surprising and very therapeutic way to access stories that I would never have been able to um, write about head on or asked about. But they seem to want to be written in this way, and the containers seem to create the safety and the space to allow them to exist together.
And what was the impact or transformation that took place internally for finally being able to write this difficult story about losing your friend?
I think there was a lot of piecing together of stories that I had never really made sense of consciously about my life or my past. I was really in this kind of grief focused bubble around my mom, and it seemed like that was all I was going to write about ever, which would have been fine and is fine. But it seemed that by having multiple ways of accessing my stories, more stories wanted to be told and had room to come up and surface, even if they had happened a very long time ago. So I was able to write well beyond what, was on top of my mind or was my comfort zone, and really dig into my past and uncover some stories that had a lot of energy and a lot of sadness for me and write them down in a way that felt so good and so contained. And looking at them, they make a lot of a sense. In the three parts, they make sense for who I am now. But I wasn't really aware of that until I had written them.
Mm, that's beautiful. I'd love to hear about the transformation or impact that's taken place externally out in the world, having written this hard story, finally gotten it into a shape and maybe being ready to share it with the world.
Mm. So I feel like it's always a fine line with vulnerable material to know when you're ready to share it or when you're not. But I think what happened in writing this story, it really reminded me that one of my reasons for wanting to share my grief stories is that there's just so much taboo around how we grieve or how we're allowed to grieve. And I think young people especially are really not supported in their grief. So I felt like I experienced something really tough and was very much looking for where are the adults, and they weren't there. Um, but now, as an adult, I maybe have the chance to share, and to add to the conversation and to break the taboos. and maybe to help other readers just normalize their experience of feeling alone. Um, so it feels like a powerful shift of being able to share what's vulnerable because it helps me personally, and that's more than enough. But in sharing it with other people, it really helps to change the whole discourse on grief that I think needs a lot of help.
That's awesome. I love that answer. So you've taken my grief and loss workshop, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and what you would say to someone who was thinking about joining.
Yeah, I first discovered Nicole through an invitation for a grief and loss class, a master's class. And I thought, oh, this is right up my alley. I'd actually been teaching classes at my local hospice on grief and loss, not for writers, but for grievers. So that felt like my comfort zone. And I was really amazed at how many tools Nicole provided for accessing your stories, finding ways to find the right time, the right space, the right support to be able to articulate your stories in a safe way, and also these very new ways of entering sideways into the stories that I hadn't heard of before. And I think offering different containers to tell our stories is what makes it feel really safe and what unlocks so much amazing material. So all of that was really new to me and really exciting. And I knew that if I was to follow up with some of these ways, some of these tools, and put in the supports recommended in place, that a lot would come out. And it certainly did. And I'm still learning, and I'm still going back to those same tools to unlock more stories.